We are now ready for our main attraction, and I'm very pleased to introduce Greg McCauley. We first met, Larry and I met Greg years ago when with Link Observatory, a NASA partner, he and his amazing staff were giving public programs down south. So we've had the privilege of watching him make Link an amazing place, and now he's moved on, but he's going to explain that. Greg is now president, CEO, and founder of Grand Universe. In the early 1970s, Greg worked for NASA at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. He worked in mission planning and analysis for lunar missions Apollo 15, 16, and 17. As a member of the lunar launch team for Apollo 17, he gave engineering support for mission control. And I'm just going to interject here, I don't think he'll mind, but Greg can say that his autograph is on the moon, on a plaque with several other autographs, but it's just amazing where life will take you. In addition to his duties at Grand Universe, he is a professional science communicator as a member of the NASA Museum Alliance. He lectures throughout the Midwest on NASA missions, astronomy, and space exploration. Greg's interests include robotic planetary exploration, exoplanet research, and of course, the future of human space exploration. So with that, I'd like to turn the floor over to Greg McCauley.
Well, thank you, Nora. As a matter of fact, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you great.
All right, as a matter of fact, I think I'd like to start, before I start my presentation, by saying that back in the 1980s, we spent a decade living in Florida, and I was a member of the Toastmasters in Palm Bay, Florida, Melbourne, Florida, and fell in love with public speaking as member for years through a corporation I worked for. And I will have to say that it was invaluable relative to what I do today. And I've given presentations like you had mentioned. For those that have not seen our presentations, they're much like a TED Talks almost. I mean, that's kind of what we styled it after. I think I've done over 400 of those throughout all over the Midwest. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to introduce to some of you that don't know about Grand Universe what this is all about and why we're passionate about our mission to create a world-class space science center here in Indianapolis. And if I can start to share my screen, if I may. There we go. And here we are. Okay, do we look okay? All right. Grand Universe, bringing science to life and changing the world. Our mission at Grand Universe is to ignite and sustain lifelong learning in science and technology. Grand Universe invites curious minds from all backgrounds to explore, create, and pursue their dreams. Our vision is connecting people, communities, and institutions to one another through the wonder of space exploration so we can explore together and create a better world for everyone. So, why is this important? Why do we feel this is important? The title of this page is A Troubling Trend. U.S. students lag behind their international peers. I'm sure everyone's aware of these statistics. In tests of reading, math, and science, 15-year-olds in the U.S. were outperformed by many of their counterparts in Asia and Europe, in some cases placing well below the international average. This was the source of this was a research done by the National Science Foundation in 2016. If you look at those three categories, many categories were involved in the study. I chose reading, math, and science to show where the United States places on a global scale in those three areas of education for 15-year-olds. In reading, we're number 24 in the world in reading. And that always struck me as unacceptable, obviously. But reading the report thoroughly, reading is in English. Those are English skills. And the United States places 24th on earth in reading skills in English. I just couldn't really believe that. In mathematics, we placed number 36 in the world. And in science, number 28 in the world. We're average or below average in those three categories. The key points here, number one, China dominates. And if you'll look at number 1, 2, and 3 in each of those categories, it's Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Singapore. And the reason for that, I'm assuming, is because it was important to them that they excel in those areas. That was the reason they're number one. And bless their hearts, they accomplished their goal. Number two, if we don't reverse this trend, our nation will become irrelevant as a world leader in science and technology. And so this is not just something that's happened in the last few years. If you look at the data, this is a trend that's been happening over the last couple of decades. Science and technology are the foundations of American industry, and they are essential to our economic future. The inspiration of Apollo. And the reason I worked for NASA in the first place, and I'll stay on this picture, this frame here for a second. I'm a child of the space race. I'm 69 years old. I graduated from high school in June of 1969. And of course, a month later, in July of 69, is when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed at Tranquility Base on the moon. And so Yuri Gagarin, I remember Yuri Gagarin. He was a world hero. So from the early 60s all through that decade until the early 70s was the time of the space race. I was influenced by that. Many millions of Americans were influenced by those days to pursue careers in science and technology. And I am convinced that that's why I am here today in the development of not only the Link Observatory, Space Science Institute, which is now the Link Institute, and the development of Grand Universe. Let's take a look at this. I also run the risk every time I do a presentation like this of putting graphs up on the screen, because I had always heard from Toastmasters that every time you put a graph on the screen, you lose 10% of your audience. And so I'll kind of go through this quickly so I don't lose too many people. If you'll look at this graph, this is interesting. This is the name of this was Space Exploration's Impact on Educational Achievement. W.H. Siegfried did a presentation to the Space Technology and Applications International Forum in 2003, and he'd done a study based upon space colonization and benefits for the world. If you look at the graph and that shaded area in the center, it starts at that vertical dashed line on the left, which is when Kennedy initiated the Apollo program and made that public in his famous speech in May of 1961 at Rice University, when he said, "We choose to go to the moon." And if you look at this graph, on the left column, the left vertical column, that's the number of PhDs earned, in this case, in physical sciences, engineering PhDs, and mathematical science PhDs. The horizontal column on the bottom starts in 1958 and goes to 1979. And so that's the year. If you look at when Kennedy made the speech in May of 1961, and then move to the right of that shaded area, that's the end of the Apollo program, the last man on the moon in December of 1972. That shaded area between those two dates was the space race with the Russians. And if you'll look at those three graphs, the blue one on the top is the number of physical science PhDs, and this is all a matter of public record. This is why this research was made possible. The middle line, or the yellow line, is the number of engineering PhDs, and the lower line is the number of mathematical science PhDs. If you look from 61 to 72, and you look at the rise, the exponential rise in the number of PhDs, and then how those drop off back to normal after the Apollo program was terminated, it becomes evident that the idea that our manned space exploration, our space race with the Russians to the moon, inspired a great number of Americans to pursue careers in science and technology. As you would imagine, for everyone that went on to a PhD, there were many, many others that just went to a master's level or their undergrad studies in those particular areas and beyond. So millions of people were inspired by that space race. That is what we call today STEM. Science, technology, engineering, mathematics, or STEAM. Of course, now they've added arts to that. I believe that's necessary. But we call that STEM today. What we did back in 2012 when I founded the Link Institute, that all came about because of my relationship with NASA in the early 70s. After the Apollo program was over, I moved back to Indiana. I was originally from Kokomo, Indiana, just north of Indianapolis, born and raised. And went to work for private industry, ended up owning a company out of Carmel that was a national medical diagnostic imaging company. I was CEO for 11 years. I became a speaker for NASA's what's called their ambassador program, their solar system ambassador program. And I was an unpaid volunteer. I worked with the Jet Propulsion Lab and did lectures at libraries, started here in Carmel, Indiana, and started lecturing for libraries because I just loved doing it. I didn't get paid for it. It was typically on weeknights, a 7 or 7:30 lecture for free at the library. The library would do the advertising. And when I first started, I wondered just how many people would be interested in space exploration like I was, and didn't know if I'd ever draw a crowd or not. My first lecture was in, I think, 2011 at the Carmel Public Library. I had 72 people show up. And I was amazed. And so I started creating PowerPoint presentations, got better at using PowerPoint, and integrated video clips and audio, music files, etc., in my PowerPoints over time to become more sophisticated in this. I've done hundreds of those. And I was amazed that everywhere I went, every library I went to was kind of this doorway to that local community. And I was just amazed at how many people were interested in space exploration like I was. I stumbled across the Link Observatory, which is in Morgan County, the southwest side of Indianapolis. It was built in 1939 by Dr. Getty Link, who was at the time a very well-to-do, famous thyroid surgeon out of Indianapolis, friends of the Lillys, from the Eli Lilly Company, and was a surgeon by day and an astronomer by night. And he had built with his own money the Link Observatory on his summer property in Morgan County, up on a hilltop, which is the highest point in Morgan County. It was 500 feet or so. But he cleared the top of this wooded area. He owned 55 acres up there. And with his own money, built the Link Observatory. When it was completed, first light was Christmas Eve, 1939. When it was completed, it was the 8th largest observatory in the country. And of the top 10 sized observatories in the country, it was the only one that was privately owned. He was very deeply connected with Indiana University because of his medical schooling. He was one of the co-founders of the IU School of Medicine. And in 1948, he gave in a trust the Link Observatory to Indiana University Department of Astronomy. The IU Department of Astronomy used the Link Observatory as their primary observatory for the next 40 years until 1988. And they retired it in 88. They moved to larger facilities. With the advent of the internet, it made it possible to operate, do research on observatories around the globe on mountaintops remotely. And they built more sophisticated facilities that were web enabled, and Kitt Peak, as an example, with a WISE observatory there, and retired the Link. And it sat there for years, being maintained by a local astronomy club. The Indiana Astronomical Society used it as their meeting place and kept it in very good condition. IU still maintained the property and mowed that and paid for major maintenance, et cetera. I ran across it, didn't know anything about it, in 2011. I thought this would be a perfect place to do lectures as a solar system ambassador, because it had attached to the building a 50-seat auditorium. And I think, Nora, you've been there. You and your husband probably been out there many times. And so I did my first, I made an agreement with IU, land use agreement with IU Astronomy, and I leased it for $1 a year. They were happy to have it being used for public public engagement. Again, my goal was later on to be used for STEM education for middle school and high school students. My first lecture, I had 6 people there in the auditorium. They were all relatives of mine. It was my wife and my kids and my brother-in-law and his kids, and I had to promise them all I'd take them to Gray's Cafeteria in Mooresville and buy them dinner if they'd show up, which wasn't part of my marketing plan. I wouldn't have been able to afford it. Our public programming really kind of began there from the Link Observatory. In 2018, our public programs collectively attracted over 68,000 people. And so interest in space exploration is phenomenal. We know this from our personal experience. It was obvious to me at the time that if we wanted to expand, we had completely outgrown the facility at the Link Observatory. We could comfortably see about 20 people on the observation deck at any one time. Our social media grew to a point where if we would advertise that we were going to have a viewing, free public viewing at the observatory, we'd have 600 people show up. It was unbelievable. And it was a real problem because we could only get about 50 people in the building at any one time. And so all the rest of those people, I guess, went home mad. And so the Grand Universe was born out of necessity. We searched for a site for Grand Universe. We decided on a site that I'll tell you about here in a moment. But we immediately got involved in education because it was evident to us, because of the relationship we developed with local schools, that space exploration inspired young people like no other endeavor. It inspired them like it inspired me. And so in 2015, I owned my company in Carmel. I sold it and devoted my time and my money to the development of Grand Universe. And this is how we did it. Look at the screen. We got involved with Kennedy Space Center, Johnson Space Center, NASA Jet Propulsion Lab out of Pasadena, Goddard Space Flight Center out of Greenbelt, Maryland, and Marshall Space Flight Center, which is where they build the rockets in Huntsville, Alabama. And we developed these relationships with the departments of education in each one of those centers because it covered the entire gambit of rocket science and robotic exploration of Mars and our solar system, and human exploration as it was being developed at the time, and launches from Kennedy and Goddard, of course, is NASA science with solar science and the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter and those fantastic missions that they had. We then got involved with MIT, Caltech, Johns Hopkins University, University of Arizona. You can see those in the lower left-hand corner. And we started to develop STEM education programs that we delivered using technology much like Zoom. We would deliver those directly to classrooms and bring NASA live into classrooms using existing classroom technology. And we really outgrew that very quickly. And so this is kind of what our STEM partnerships that we established through STEM education looks like. One of them, the big ones today, is what's called our virtual classroom. We have a new project going right now on this in development. It's called Galileo. It's a direct response to our pandemic situation. As you know, there are no schools in session anywhere in this country, I don't believe, certainly not in the state of Indiana. Zoom and those types of formats are excellent. We're using one right now. But we wanted a format where we could actually create a K through 12 virtual classroom with a teacher's desk and student's desk and student notebooks and bulletin boards, and be able to invite in guests, those type of things, and make it more applicable to a K through 12 classroom, which we didn't feel Zoom necessarily was. When you do remote learning at college level, it's really different than doing remote learning at the intermediate and middle school, high school level. And so that's under development right now. It's called virtual classrooms. It's called Galileo for obvious reasons. But inspiring students with NASA missions, astronomy, space exploration, Galileo takes on the whole gambit, and teachers can use that with existing textbooks from the DOE, and teach English and mathematics and history and those type of things beyond STEM. And so that's our current initiative that we're working hard on right now. We're looking for funding for that particular program. Discovery science we got involved in years ago to discover, do earth science, discover new exoplanets, explore the Martian surface, etc. We're very deeply engaged with Zooniverse, which is owned actually by Adler Planetarium and the Webster Institute up in Chicago. And we bring that directly into computer labs and teach those science skills, those citizen science skills to students. Our first foray into that was about 4 or 5 years ago. We did a thing called the Young Astronomers Club. It was a pilot program. We got a computer room at Carmel Public Library that had 20 PCs available. We put that out in 3 days. We had 20 students signed up. It was really remarkable. And we have advanced that into classrooms and computer labs all over the state of Indiana. We do the science of the sun. As you can imagine, when you're involved in an observatory, you realize that with daylight savings time, sometimes it doesn't get dark till 10 or 10:30 at night. You don't really get a lot of students out there, certainly during the school year, that late at night. And so we really, I believe, and I won't take credit for this, but we really kind of reinvented daytime astronomy. And we use hydrogen alpha telescopes. What you're looking at in that picture is from the Lunt Corporation. They make solar hydrogen alpha telescopes. If you look at the image in the middle right-hand columns that says through the eyepiece, that's an actual mobile phone image through an eyepiece of a hydrogen alpha telescope, what the sun looks like at that narrow, very narrow bandwidth of hydrogen alpha. The daylight sky goes black, and you can see the prominences and the sunspots. It's really remarkable. And then we bring in lectures into the classroom on heliophysics, or the science of the sun. That has been gigantic for us. And so I'm going to explain a little bit later on about one of the observatories at Grand Universe and how we're going to turn that into Solaris. I mean, it's going to be, dedicated to the sun. This is a fascinating thing to be involved in. We have a half a dozen of those telescopes. They're very expensive. We have them on completely robotic mounts that track the sun. It's really remarkable stuff. We do school lecture series. This is kind of an extension of my involvement with the Solar System Ambassadors, and we've kind of improved our technology and delivery to be much like a TED Talks. That was the whole idea. I probably shouldn't say that publicly, bring their name up publicly, but it's such a great format that they use that we bring those into schools and call them Link Talks. We've rebranded those now through Grand Universe, and of course we don't do those now because everyone's doing social distancing, etc. But we'll re-engage those when the time comes. Here's some other things we do. Discovering New Worlds. That's some of the auditory things that we do, auditorium things. Upper right-hand corner is virtual reality. We are way into VR. We brought VR in with space exploration years ago before the general public knew what Google Cardboard was like. I don't know if Google Cardboard is still around, but Google did this thing years ago called Google Expeditions. And they made this cardboard thing that you could buy, and it all folded up into a headpiece that fit on your face, and you inserted your mobile phone into that. Anybody remember that? You don't have to answer, but it was like $8, and you folded this cheap little thing up, and it had a divider between the two eyes with these two lenses, and the image on the smartphone horizontally was two separate images with a line between the two, and it gave you this kind of a virtual reality view that Google presented. And as you turned, the accelerometer on your phone allowed you to view C360 videos as if you're actually there. We dug up and created some of our own. We dug up these VR space exploration VRs of floating outside the International Space Station, walking next to the Mars Curiosity rover on the surface of Mars. Those came from the Jet Propulsion Lab. We bought a bunch of these plastic VR headsets that you see this lady in the upper right-hand corner using. That's a picture from one of our exhibits, because we needed to have exhibits that we could take to places like the Children's Museum and Conner Prairie. And you can't take telescopes inside very effectively. So we needed a tabletop exhibit, and banners just didn't cut it. And so we brought VR in, and we had lines 50 people long, and most people had not heard of virtual reality. I can remember being in places where we'd have the elderly people there, people that were elderly, and we'd have to go out and hold onto their arms and prop them up so they wouldn't topple over because of vertigo. And this was a huge hit. And so now we're, of course, into the more modern technologies in VR, and it's been a big hit for us. Lower right-hand corner, lower left-hand, is some of our live programs that we brought in, virtual conferencing. This was at the Indiana State Fair at a place called the Glass Barn. We're going to be doing a larger version of this as a part of Grand Universe in our main facility. But what you're looking at there, we brought the chief scientist from the ISS Veggie program when they first grew lettuce on board the International Space Station and harvested the lettuce and ate it. We presented the chief scientist to farmers at the Indiana State Fair about 1 week after they ate that lettuce. And they were able to talk live back and forth to Kennedy Space Center live through much like we're doing here. And it was just fantastic. We had farmers in their bib overalls talking with the Veggie program chief scientists and biologists about what type of fertilizer they used and how they applied the fertilizer and what frequencies of light those LEDs were that simulated the sunlight. It was absolutely remarkable, and that, I believe, proved some of the fun things that virtual conferencing can do. And now, of course, this pandemic has taken virtual conferencing from a cool, fun thing that's neat to do to something that's absolutely necessary. And I believe what we'll find after we've cleaned up the mess of this pandemic and everybody gets back to work, I believe that we're going to find that these technologies will now take the forefront of how we do business and education in America. That's a prediction of mine. But I think things will change because of what we're all experiencing today. Things will change. And I believe virtual conferencing, like we're doing today, will be at the forefront of how we do business and how we communicate and how we educate. In the lower right-hand corner, you see stargazing. We are huge stargazers. We still do this. We do a lot of them now out at Grant Park in Westfield, and I'll explain what Grant Park is in a minute. It's called Grant Park After Dark, and we gather huge crowds out there. So we'll discuss that as we go. We believe that humanity is beginning a new space age, and I believe I'm talking to the choir right now about this, but all the evidence is there that we are. There are so many new national space agencies across the world that simply did not exist back during the Apollo days. NASA certainly did, and what is now the Russian Space Agency, Roscosmos, was part of the Soviet Union, of course, and those were the only games on Earth when it came to space exploration. Now, of course, the United States Space Force is in play. Who knows what that's going to be? That could evolve into a Star Trek Federation in our future. I'm just predicting. I mean, who knows what that's going to be? When you look at NASA's budget as an example, which is $20 billion, you look at the DoD budget, which is almost $700 billion, and you wonder why we don't move space exploration under that budget so we could be better funded. Maybe, it's not a prediction, but maybe that's the direction this will all go in the future. Of course, European Space Agency, JAXA for the Japanese, Roscosmos is the Russians' space agency, the Israel Space Agency, India Space Agency, China National Space Administration. China is huge. They've already sent robotic probes to the backside of the moon. You all know that. China could very well be the next people to land on the moon. They could very well do that. There's a big race going on right now. Again, you don't hear much about it, but we may so in the future. And of course, there's Artemis. And we're very deeply engaged with Johnson Space Center, where all the, of course, astronaut training goes on there. I'll make an announcement here later on in the presentation, but astronaut David Wolf, over the last year and a half now, is our chief science officer, and he is also on the National Space Council under the vice president. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the National Space Council, I'm sure you all are, back during the Kennedy administration, when we entered into the space race, when we started American space exploration, the vice president of the United States was assigned as the boss of space under John F. Kennedy. And he, the vice president at that time, is where the director, the NASA's executive director, the director of NASA, reported to the vice president. The president, the vice president reported to the president, but the VP ran the space program. That's one of the reasons why the Manned Spacecraft Center was located in Houston, Texas, because Johnson, being the vice president, of course, was a senator from Texas. That's probably the reason it's there and not down in Florida someplace. But the Artemis program now, of course, being run by the Vice President of the United States. The National Space Council has been reinstituted. It was canceled back in the 70s. And David Wolf is one of the main people on that particular council. And that's our next missions to the moon, and then certainly onto Mars. Artemis is all about Mars. I want to make that clear. Artemis is about human exploration and habitation of the planet Mars. They're using the moon as the test bed, as the beta concept on how to establish an off-Earth habitat that's close by, so that it's, in case there are problems, which there will be, and challenges, they're relatively close by and much more safe. After those techniques and technologies are well developed, we will then move all of that to Mars. That's the idea behind Artemis. The first woman and the next man on the moon, and it's going to be right now sometime in 2024. That may, of course, be extended. Nobody knows, but as I believe everyone understands, the next American astronaut to walk down that ladder, which will be at on the South Pole of the moon, will be a female astronaut. I think everybody understands that that's what's going to happen. STEM is one of the most important initiatives in education right now. Of course, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. What we have learned in our research, that one of the more effective ways to provide STEM to young people is to involve the family. It's called 2-Gen. I don't know if anybody's really familiar with the 2-Gen learning process, but 2-Gen STEM education processes intentionally and simultaneously work with children and their parents in an inclusive learning environment. And this is what we found during our STEM activities in schools around the state of Indiana. What we found was that kids easily get excited about space exploration. You get excited about two things: dinosaurs and space exploration. You know, you take a fourth grader or fifth grader, you hit a hot button on either one of those. We don't do dinosaurs. They're not growing dinosaurs anymore. Space exploration is what it's all about. Kids get excited about space exploration and go home. Their parents don't really have the tools or the understanding to be able to support that excitement with their students. If you can combine STEM education with some sort of a family environment where you can get the parents up to speed and give them the tools to help support that newfound inspiration in children, you're much more effective. There are places around the country that are they're expert at doing this. Look at the upper left-hand corner. The St. Louis Science Center, I don't know how many people have been there. It's a gigantic facility. 1.2 million people per year come to that. They currently have STEM education initiatives to not only bring STEM education to middle school, high school kids, but involve their parents. They understand the value of involving the entire family in the inspiration of STEM education. This next one to the right, Great Lakes Science Center, is up in Cleveland, Ohio. Again, this wonderful place that involves the whole family in STEM education. Down in Nashville, this wonderful science center in Nashville. Columbus, Ohio is COSI. If you've not been to these places, you really need to go because they're fantastic. Louisville has this great Kentucky Science Center that's located in downtown Louisville. And of course, Adler Planetarium in Chicago. I would certainly encourage anyone and everyone to go to these places. We've been to all of them. I know the directors of all of these. We've been deeply involved in helping us understand what we need to be doing as we're planning Grand Universe. Some of our questions to these people were, if you're going to do this all over again, start fresh based upon what you know from these centuries old facilities. Sometimes they're over 100 years old. Certainly the Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles, this magnificent place that everybody knows about. If you could do it all over again, what would you do? And more importantly, what would you never do again? And so Grand Universe was born out of those ideas. All of these places that you see here are the #1 school field trip destinations in their states. #1, all of them. And all of them currently have STEM programs related to the new space age and their leading destination for school field trips. And so, what about the state of Indiana? What about us? Well, here's where we rate in the nation. Number 25 out of 50 states. The interesting thing is 45 minutes from my house, and I live on the north side of Indianapolis, is the cradle of 17 of America's astronauts, Purdue University. And yet Indianapolis is one of the largest metropolitan areas in this country that doesn't have a space center. We have to change this. I believe our economic future in the state of Indiana depends on the fact that we move the state of Indiana by force. We move them through determination and force to take a higher standing in STEM education in our nation. I believe we need to take a leading role. And so comes Grand Universe, bringing science to life, changing the world. Our planned grand opening for Grand Universe, this is our architect's overview of what the building will look like, is spring of 2024. If that rings a bell, we've done our business plan. We've got all of the partnerships in place, from our architects to our planetarium designs to all of our observatory designs are complete. Architectural people, construction people, civil engineering people, everybody's in place. We've looked at our business plan and our project plan, and we believe that if we do things right, if the funding happens as we think it should, we're kind of on the pause button right now because of this pandemic, but we will be able to open and coincide with the next landing on the moon. How exciting would that be? It's a world-class astronomical observatory, digital planetarium, and space science center located in Westfield, Indiana, which is on the north side of Indianapolis. I'm sure all of you, if you live locally, have heard of a place called Grand Park. Grand Park's north side of Indianapolis, just north of Carmel. It's about 12 miles, I believe, north of the 465 loop that goes around Marion County, Indianapolis area. Westfield created 4 or 5 years ago a place called Grand Park. It's about 450 acres. It's the largest outdoor sports complex in the world. It has 40-some fields, from soccer fields to baseball diamonds to a large Grand Park event center. Over 2.5 million visitors, middle school and high school age teams from schools from all over the Midwest visited Grand Park last year for various soccer tournaments and baseball tournaments. It's a summer camp for the Colts, the Indianapolis Colts football team. The Pacers are involved now. So this is this great destination at Grand Park that is growing by leaps and bounds. And because of that, Westfield, which has been an incorporated city now for only 10 years, Westfield has really exploded and is #2 in the state of Indiana for tourism in the state of Indiana, Westfield, Indiana. #1 is the convention center around downtown Indianapolis. #2 is Grand Park in Westfield. So exciting things are happening. I have no idea how we pulled this off, but we have now secured the land for Grand Park at Grand Universe at Grand Park. And if you look on the right-hand side, we are literally right across the street from Grand Park, and we have 2,500 frontage feet of the Monon Trail. And that is the location of Grand Universe. Now, here's a close-up view. This comes from this is looking down from above. This comes from our architects. This is a conceptual design of what it will look like. If you'll look at the lower part of that, you'll see the baseball diamonds, which is east is up, by the way. North is to the left, if you're looking at that image. The baseball diamonds right across the street, which is Tomlinson Road, right across the street from the baseball diamonds, across the Monon, is a place called Observatory Park. That is our land. We're working with the city of Westfield. That will be a trailhead for the Monon, which means it will have restrooms and parking That's what a trailhead is on the Monon. And we're building what's called Observatory Park. And the city will hopefully manage that. We're in talks with the city about doing that. We're not in the park business. We don't want to be. But we wanted this themed park on the Monon as a major Monon destination dedicated to astronomy and space exploration. Therefore, the name of it now is Observatory Park. I'm not sure if that will remain the name for the long term, but that's it. Look to the north of that, to the top of that, across Tomlinson Road, and that's Grand Universe. On the left side of that, you'll see a red rectangular building, which is called the Technology Center. That will probably not be its name as well. It might be something like Grand Universe Institute, but it's dedicated to STEM education and workforce development. To the right of that is our main building called Grand Universe and the astronaut David Wolf Observatory. This is kind of a breakaway view of the backside. You're looking to the north right now. Those are the observatories. They're facing south toward the core of the galactic center. That's the sweet spot for astronomy. If you've got a public outreach type of observatory, we do have light pollution there. Everybody asks that question. Isn't there a lot of light pollution on the north side of Indianapolis? Yes, there is. But there are two types of observatories in the world. There are research observatories, which is the Keck Observatory and Gemini, that's down in South America at the Atacama Desert. I'm sorry for the mispronouncing. The Atacama Desert, I'm sorry. And the Keck Observatory is at Mauna Kea on the Big Island of Hawaii, up on the mountaintops. That's where all the heavy research goes. They're at 12 to 14,000 feet of altitude above the cloud layer. There's no light pollution. Those are research observatories. Public observatories, public engagement observatories are where the public is. And we can use optical narrow bandwidth light filters to effectively turn off light pollution. And so we've been engaged with optical development companies that make those types of optical filters. We are having a survey done closer to the time that we'll be rolling out this program. And we'll be doing a spectral analysis of the night sky above our location. Each light source has its own frequency. Depends on what type of lighting is around you, whether it's fluorescent lighting or the lighting around Grant Park might be, krypton lighting. You get the drift. Each one of those emits its own frequencies of light. They either are emitted out into the air or they're reflected off the ground or off the parking lot. Through a spectral analysis, we'll be able to determine what those frequencies are and have custom developed narrowband filters to effectively block out those frequencies and turn a light polluted sky dark as you look through the eyepiece. And so if you look at this breakaway view, we have over 100,000 square feet of exhibit areas. You're looking at the top side of that, above ground view. Looking inside the building, it's all glass in the center. In the middle is a 70-foot diameter digital planetarium. Our advisory people and planetarium design people are actually local Indianapolis company that is one of the largest in the world that develop planetariums. They did the new upgrade at the planetarium at the Adler Planetarium and at Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles. They build these all over the world. They just happen to be local to us. And this will be at 70 feet, the largest 360 full video digital planetarium in the state of Indiana. Food court, retail shops, of course. There is an underground area that's not shown there that is also involved. That square footage, that footprint, is 350 feet wide and 150 feet deep, which gives us a 50,000 square foot footprint with 3 levels. That's 150,000 square feet total, and which gives us, after offices and those other things, the planetarium, et cetera, gives us around 100,000 square feet of exhibit areas. One of the biggest exhibits we're going to have in conjunction with the Johnson Space Center is our Artemis mission exhibit. And we wish to have an analog of our habitat on the moon available. That's just our goal right now, our target, so that we can involve families and young people to actually see what it's like to live at Shackleton Crater on the moon. And we'll certainly be utilizing the very latest in virtual reality, augmented reality, video hyperwalls, which is what you saw at the State Fair, the big video grids, the video screen grids on a much larger scale, and all the technology that we can use. We can bring NASA centers in live all day long and have education programs and various live presentations for our families. And then, of course, the observatories are the Astronaut David Wolf Observatory. And that, of course, is Astronaut David Wolf right there. Who's Your Astronaut joins the Space Center. And that was the Inside Indiana Business, October 25th, 2017. Let me go back a frame here. Take a look at the observatory on the right-hand side. That is our astrophysics observatory. We're using telescopes there by a U.S. company that's actually up in Michigan called PlaneWave. We'll be using a 24-inch PlaneWave Dahl-Kirkham optical design. It's a Cassegrain, one of the largest telescopes of its kind being used in a public observatory, all robotically controlled. It has a fascinating mount that's robotic. It can that mount can slew, which means it can move the field of view from the telescope from horizon to horizon in about 1.5 seconds. So it's fast. We can track the ISS right through the eyepiece. The one on the left is our solar observatory, and that's dedicated to solar work. And so I know I'm going to be getting ready to finish up. This is the Astronaut David Wolf Observatory. We're going to have our own radio telescope along with the Artemis mission, mission control room. We'd love to do robotics, have a robotics lab. If you'll look, we went planetary displays, visual, VR, and augmented reality, those types of things. And of course, our 70-foot diameter, 360 live, if we can, planetarium, and our technology center where we'll have local university participation with Purdue, hopefully, and Ivy Tech, hopefully, after school programs, summer space camps, educator workshops, and after in the evening, workforce development for adults so that we can teach advanced technologies in manufacturing, et cetera, help support high-tech industries in the local area, help Indiana take a national leadership role in STEM, promote economic development in high-tech industries, create Indiana's high-tech workforce, and enhance tourism initiatives locally, regionally, and statewide. That's what Grand Universe is all about. Go to granduniverse.org, and that's our main website. Please support us. This is a $35 million project, and it's underway right now with a variety of initiatives in our capital campaign. And that's what we're all about. We're excited about it. We're up and running right now. Come out and see us. Follow us in our social media, because we've created right now the virtual Grand Universe. And as Grand Universe opens, we'll add the physical presence of that facility to our virtual Grand Universe to create something that we feel is one of a kind. I appreciate everyone in attendance today. Thank you for having me.
Well, Greg, personally, I'm kind of, I am amazed. So can you hear me?
I can.
All right. So you did mention a couple ways to stay updated on this project. How about we'll get links and the virtual Grand Universe, and I will send that out in an email.
Okay.
Folks, so they can stay connected with us. I'm just 2024, really? We have to wait that long?
Well, it'll take us 18 months after we start construction. We have to, there's of course a major fundraising effort right now. So this is a big, big project, and as you would imagine.
So yes, that leads to my next question, is that how can interested people be involved? Like, I've looked at that website, Grand Universe. Was there a giving button someplace?
There is, if you scroll down. If
Okay.
you, yeah, there's a support us button down there. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll send you an email. I would like anyone interested to contact me directly, either by email, by telephone. This is what I do. We have a crew, not a big crew, but we have a crew of individuals that are dedicated to the current development of our studio, which is like a digital learning network lab. It's a TriCaster type studio where we are creating the virtual Grand Universe. My job is to work with people and fund the funding partners and get involved and create those relationships. So I'd like anyone interested to call me directly. We can tell all about our vision, what got us here, what's inspiring us, how they can be a part of all this, a member, a partner. This is not something that we are just doing. This is something an entire community does.
That would be great. You send me information and I'll make sure that it gets out to the right people.
You know, because we are in the development phase of the facility, Grand Universe, there has to be some sort of a more formal connection between the Mars Society and Grand Universe. There has to be.
Well, I'd be happy to talk to you about that.